Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. And if you love the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Twitter or Instagram at AstroTerry. And today I'm super excited to have David Reid here. David is the Chief Technology Officer for NOV, one of the world's top energy equipment manufacturers. And we're going to talk all aspects of the energy universe. So David, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Well, I'll start off by saying right off the bat, full disclosure, I actually work for NOV part-time. I started a few months ago helping you guys with energy transition technologies. Just so my listeners know, I do have a relationship there with NOV, and it's been really cool. And I wanted to talk to you as the Chief Technology Officer about kind of all aspects of energy. Sure. And to start off, like, how did you get involved in this business?
I wasn't trying. I started in Scotland, and it was an oil town. They were developing the North Sea for oil and gas, and I had some tastes of the business. Wasn't a great fan particularly, and was doing architecture, more technical and creative in the way I work. And so I married to California, went to California, came back to Aberdeen, and then someone met me basically, and I had studied in college, particularly the behaviors of the two cultures, the American and British culture, and why London was being built by American companies. They were getting all the contracts, and they were doing things cheaper and better. And so I kind of studied that, which no one had done before. So I was sharing that with a guy who was an American trying to run a repair shop for large drilling equipment. And he said, "You want a job?" And I'm like, "Well, maybe," So I came, but it was a California-based corporation, and they were so advanced in how they thought about human beings and worked with people, and I'd worked in California, so I understood them. So I quickly got very attracted to the culture of the company and the innovative nature of it. And they were making giant robots at the time, which I kind of kept getting drawn towards, 140-foot tall big robots, which was pretty interesting. Wow. And it was new idea at the time, and I think everyone thought it was the CEO's kind of crazy idea. But I was really drawn into that. And when you start to see the size and the structure and the things, the machinery and the technology, I just got drawn right into it.
Yeah. And that was NOV?
NOV, Varco originally, so the V part of NOV. But yeah, right. that was 30 years ago in next February. So.
Wow. Speaking of architecture in London, I literally just saw a show this morning on Vox about how in London you can't grow up, your house is stuck, so they're going down. And really? Basements are a problem now. Apparently especially the uber wealthy are making these huge basements that are causing, problems in other houses. I had no idea. Yeah.
Well, they have in the States, and when I came to work a bit in architecture in the States, there was a lot less law.
Right.
There's a lot more restriction on how cities look and are built, and that the whole planning process.
Right.
So here there's just there's a new building. Does it fit? I don't know. Right. It's very interesting, but it was kind of fun, particularly California. It was a wild west of dealing with that was the 80s in Silicon Valley area. They were like, I don't know if this will work in an earthquake. Let's try it. That's kind of how the law read, and we'll find out, So it was interesting.
Well, here in Houston, we're both in Houston right now. There's basically no rules. There's strip malls and billboards and everything everywhere. Yeah. So you were those 140-foot robots. Were those the big offshore rigs?
Yeah, a lot of them didn't exist. I think we were probably 100 foot at the time. I say 140. That's what it ended up being. But we had a few out, and it was early computing. I think what people don't know in oil and gas is the technology is really advanced. And actually, we'd often connect with NASA and with the space industry because or military, they tended to have the tech that didn't exist. So we were using computing systems and writing code before it happened, and so before it became common. And so you'll find old drilling rigs are full of military spec components.
Right.
That you can't buy off the shelf,
Well, when you say 100 feet or 140 feet, you're talking above the water, because they can be thousands of feet tall, right?
Yeah, well, they can be as tall as you want, but in
Yeah.
fact, that's kind of what happened in the efficiency of drilling, that we kind of worked out we can handle more pipe and make less connections as we went deeper. So it was a government project that started that. The Japanese wanted to drill for coring purposes, was the story. I don't know if that was truth or not, but they wanted to core at 10,000 feet. And as soon as they said, the funny thing about oil and gas is it has this wild kind of wildcatter, approach where,
Yeah.
government, it took them, I think, 7 years to build the first ship. 2 years into them saying it, we were drilling offshore at 10,000 feet, and lots of just high risk, high reward kind of behavior. So a lot of the systems in the first year were really struggling, but that included, if you're going to go 10,000 feet and then drill another 30, 40,000 feet, you're going to need robots, you're going to need
Yeah.
machines. People can't do that work.
Yeah.
And for efficiency, they just realized if we do longer stands of drill pipe, we can use robots. We can be whatever makes sense. But these were on vessels, so you had to think about stability of vessel and everything else. So you can't keep going. You're actually floating out there. But fascinating, the speed of that. I was already engaged because I started in '92, and there was big machines, and these were kind of, there were robots that would do the making up of the connections. That was interesting, and I had the workshop that had some of that stuff in it. And I immediately wanted to get out, see stuff, and then late '90s was when that 10,000 feet thing happened, and control technology had to advance. We had to run within a minute. You have to close anything at the seabed 10,000 feet away, and seal and protect, right? So all of that has to happen and then separate. Fascinating technology. And we talked to, I think, Mission to Mars people at the time, and they were like,
Yeah.
you're crazy. You're going to do what? And they just thought we were wild.
When you compare space with the ocean,
Yeah.
when you go into space, it's 1 atmosphere difference, right? You go from 1 atmosphere of pressure to 0. But when you go underwater, every 10 meters, it's an extra atmosphere. So
right. It's high pressures. And in fact, one of the cool technologies that's evolved is using that pressure. So
yeah.
we're actually looking at seawater cleaning. We have a system that sits on the seabed, and it will produce clean water using the weight, the hydrostatic head of the fluid. And you don't need a power system to do that. It can actually self-clean without power. So it's just a cool idea. But that, yeah, it gets very different what you're doing. And you actually lose ability to contain pressure as well, because you have pressure vessels down there, and they take all this additional pressure, and it actually depletes their capabilities. So there's a lot of smart ways. We do that with pressure vessels too. We'll actually use the hydrostatic head to charge up the vessel so that you can have power to close in on a well. So yeah, there's just tons and tons of cool tech.
There's a lot of cool stuff. Well, so I want to talk about that. You're actually working on a film, which we got to see last week. Paul Derfillo. It made me really excited to see all the different innovations and new technologies that people had to develop over the years. Yeah. But it's one of the things I noticed from space, and I talk about this a lot, is that you don't really see humans during the daylight, but you see them at nighttime in city lights. And it struck me after a few days in space that I wasn't looking at population, I was looking at wealth. And what that really means is that energy leads to wealth, not like rich billionaires, just
survival of the planet. I mean,
having a tractor for your farm, or having refrigeration for your food, right? It leads to not starving and not having mosquitoes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, the progression of humanity, not everyone understands it very well, but it is low cost abundant energy that has made so much possible. Life expectancy growth is a direct correlation. People live longer, they become healthier as they've been able to do more, been able to move around the world, around the planet easily at lower costs. And so that in many countries, you get to experience it. So probably one of my favorite things about the industry is that you're all over the world, and not everyone understands. I've arrived back in the States with stamps in my passport where they're like, what were you doing in China? Well, oil and gas. And Paris, oil and gas too. And Vietnam, we're like, that all these countries, Africa, yes, all of them. and they just no. And then they'll take you to a side room and something's wrong.
Interview. How many
Yeah,
countries is NOV in? Right, like 70 some, isn't it?
we've been in 70. I think we're probably about 65-ish right now, something like
65.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll go in and out depending, what's going on in the countries. But at one time, that was one of my jobs, was to try and project who's next and start building before they start realizing, that they're in growth, and then you can't afford to build there. So that was a job for a while, and some of those were just guesses, but they were worth it. And like some countries didn't happen.
Right. What's the North Sea like? It seems like this exotic place.
It's exotic. And I never think of it that way. In fact, when they first sold it to us, when I was a little boy watching television, Shell did this. They would put this big dramatic, because it's a wild place. I mean, the driving rain and the wind and you're in. It's funny because as we look at energy transition, it's the hottest spot for high powered wind.
Right.
Right where the platforms are. So you get the idea that if the wind business thinks it's a great idea, it's very windy, and it can be challenging. It's on the worst days, landing on a helicopter in the middle of nowhere on this structure gets to be pretty exciting. But I've done a lot of the traditional way, if you're not going in and off on and off a rig via helicopter, is to be on the back of a boat on this big donut with ropes tied to it, and you put your feet on the donut and you hold on to the ropes, and the crane lifts you off the boat.
Oh, really?
I've done that at really high swells. I did it in the Mediterranean when I was, when a storm's coming, you want to get off a rig because you're on there. If there comes a certain point you can't get off, and there's a bit of cabin fever happens. You're there all the time.
Right.
And that experience of coming off a rig offshore Malta, I think. And the storm was coming, and I was the last one to be allowed to go on the boat because you got this 20-foot swell starting to happen. And people will, when they decide it's over, it's like someone's landing and the back of the boat is flat. And so you'll actually drop into the water if you miss. And I saw one person do that after I just got off, and I was like, okay, I made it. It's some wild stuff.
I had a Navy SEAL named Clint Emerson on my podcast a few months ago, and he was talking about boarding this boat in I think it was a Persian Gulf. It was like a pirate boat thing in the Persian Gulf, but it was big swells. And he said like they were down low in their boat, and the swell would come up, and they could look over and like see the captain, and then they were going down. And
that's what it's like. I mean, you shouldn't be getting off a boat onto a boat at that point, but it's just everyone's so desperate, they're giving it a shot until you're like, okay, there's no one getting off now.
Well, okay, so I want to just address, I don't know, it's not the elephant in the room, but oil and gas has a bit of a bad name these days.
Sure.
and the point I just made, the 20th century saw the biggest increase in wealth or decrease in poverty, depending on how you look at it, because of oil and gas. I mean, with that it was energy that lets people. I'm reading a book called Chesapeake. It's a James Michener novel. He writes these big 1,000-page sweeping epics, and it starts in the 1500s on the Chesapeake Bay, which is where I'm from in Maryland.
Sure.
I mean, like, unless you go kill a deer or grab a fish, you starve to death. Anyway, life is much better for people because we have energy. Now, that energy causes problems, and we've learned that. Now we're really transitioning away from that. But that's a point I think that's lost. What has brought us out of the caveman age is now the demon. We need better energy, but we need to keep it in perspective. Yeah.
There's a lot of politicization of that thought, and it can destroy an industry. I mean, nuclear, just by not understanding it alone, it's got so much to solve still, but people are turned off because of it. That's kind of happened in the kind of demonization of oil and gas. And a lot of it not fact. I've actually I know when shale was taking its hits because of a YouTube video with lots of, nobody cares the facts, like this is what we saw, and so it's bad, and everyone
describe shale. What is shale?
Shale is so normally oil and gas has come out of a shale, so it's what we call the kitchen under the earth. So there's these long thin beds of mass of deteriorated over time under pressure, plants and animals and all that stuff. So it creates this It's the core of what the energy is. And so it gets pressurized and then it liquefies and turns into gas over time. And those things kind of burp up and usually get caught in a trap in the structure of the earth. And that's usually what we drill because there's so much of it gets into one location. Not often understood as it's actually inside rock. I think people don't really understand that. They think it's some big cavern. It's not a cavern. It's actually structural, but has enough fluid motion inside that you could actually extract the oil or gas. So that's how it comes from, but it comes from the shales, and we would never drill shales because when you would go through them, there was no flow in there usually. It's usually just trapped hydrocarbons, but there's a lot of it. And we get through it quickly and move looking for another, we'd pass through shales without ever thinking that that's possible to make anything of it, because it's, when you're going vertical, it's just a short moment. These are very thin sections of earth. But as we went and did offshore, we learned how to turn corners when we were drilling. We put very smart systems in the well, and very similar to what a guided missile would do. And we were able to go and find and direct miles away the structure. And when we did that, we realized these shales, we can go back in and we can actually pressure them up and break the structure and get the hydrocarbons to flow. And it was a massive break for the US, because a lot of the oil that was available had been drilled. Although there's techniques to still get more out, we usually leave a lot of the oil still in the earth or the gas. So there's techniques to get it out, but the which fracking actually was one of the original techniques for breaking up those systems and trying to get more flow. And that's kind of what we did in shale. But what people thought, I think people got the idea that we were going through the aquifers, and there was some correlation between the shale and the aquifers, and there was gas in the water at the aquifers. That was the story that went, when really the structure of a well, what we normally do is we drill as far as we can before the structure will collapse, and then we put in a structure. And so what happens when you're drilling a well is you'll drill a certain distance, you'll set steel there, you'll put cement behind it, and you'll start drilling again, and you continue to have this cement, steel, cement, steel, cement, steel into the center of the well. And the assumption is somehow there's gas coming through that structure, which for most people in the business, they're like, that's not happening.
Right.
And you're miles away. So potentially the vibrations, I think in a lot of the coal-based areas, I think there's potential that there is some gas that was leaking, but that is also very normal in aquifers that are near oil and gas. Mm-hmm. So that phenomena of seeing gas come through your tap, but everyone turned it into, this is all just people, raping and pillaging the earth, which is the story right. that has been around this for years.
Right.
And the truth is, it's a resource that we have as much as burning wood to keep yourself warm. It's a resource we have that is good for humanity. You just got to work out, okay, so what do we do with it? But explaining truth is really hard in the space. The assumption even that I had coming in was, these are not good people. I don't right. know why, but I'd been told it even in the 70s and 80s. For me, I'd had that idea of, these are not good people.
Right.
And when you get close, they're great people. Like they care about the environment, like people, people who just think they care. I mean, their connection to the interesting thing is there have been some disasters that have happened in oil and gas, but usually once, which is astounding. Like once something has gone wrong and they've understood what went wrong, it doesn't happen again. They obsess on, this can never happen.
Right.
They're focused on safety. They beat every industry in safety and culture and how they do things, which are really complex and difficult. It's right. really fascinating. So it really is kind of a PR thing. People like to hate oil, but they are highly addicted to the product, because it is giving us a life that if right. it was taken away tomorrow, people would be really upset. And I think we're actually going into an era of this because of the effects of trying to go too fast in energy transition, which we need to do energy transition, and it needs to be happening. But if you watch any area of the world where they've rapidly turned off nuclear or shut down oil and gas or find a way to do that, they start to experience not having light and not having power. And when that happens, that starts to make people think a second time about, okay, surely we could just do better and do less damage, which is kind of the way we're going.
Right. there's so many things to talk about. You mentioned nuclear, and I've been a fan of that since I was a kid because it's basically limitless power
It is.
with no emissions. I mean, there is waste that you have to deal with,
There
but
is,
we have,
and
yeah,
less now, and they've. I mean,
yeah,
I assume you've studied up on all this stuff, but nuclear is the most fascinating and highly polarized for no reason other
no
than
logical reason. There's no
no technical reason.
intellectual,
This is the oil and gas problem, which is the nuclear problem.
right,
People aren't all engineers.
right,
And so that what an engineer thinks is this is like shale is destroying your water system.
right,
No, no, it's obvious that it's not. And it doesn't matter because someone
right,
has said it now. It happened
right.
in our place. And so now, I mean, we've been fracking, I don't know, since the 70s and 80s. Some in the 30s had started the process,
Right.
but and knowing that, it's okay. But similarly, nuclear has done fantastic. Micronuclear is amazing. I mean, the
Yeah.
stuff they've been doing is great, but it's a technical thing that has a political association, and people just think it's bad. And
Yeah.
very similar to geothermal, you've got this potential in the earth and heat, just like you've got the potential, in molecules. These are probably the big answers,
Right.
And
Geothermal is amazing. It's something that I've learned about. Geothermal and micronuclear. I didn't know anything about them until a few months ago. But the
yeah,
new let's talk about Fukushima. I
yeah,
want to
sure.
mention this. Okay. So
Yeah.
Fukushima happens, this disaster in Japan.
Mm.
And in everybody's mind, LA got irradiated from it and all these people died. Well, unfortunately, the people died because of the tsunami, right?
Right.
Nobody died from the nuclear power plant.
Yeah, but don't put facts in a good story. That's the problem, is that people don't like to hear this. They've
Right.
got this narrative. They believe the thing happened.
In the nation of Germany, one of the most important nations on earth, stopped their nuclear power plants. They stopped
France,
clean.
who was
Yeah.
95% nuclear, they're down at 75% now. California just turned off some plants, and
Yeah.
they started getting rolling blackouts because it's the consistent power is so
Yeah.
fantastic to have consistent power.
And we had the Yucca Mountain, the storage facility in Nevada.
Mm.
And if you've ever been to Nevada, I spent a lot of time in Nevada flying F-16s there. I mean, it is the middle of nowhere. It's a great place to store nuclear waste forever.
Right.
And for political reasons, they shut that down. So my point is, we were given this gift of limitless energy that you have to be careful with. I granted that, but compared to everything else, it's pretty spectacular. And because of these emotional decisions that are not based in fact, and that permeates, right? Yeah.
It's the focus of technology is always the answer. Is if you can focus technology on something, you can solve it. And we're doing it with hydrocarbons right now.
Right.
How do we get less carbon in the air? Well, that's
Right.
very solvable. There's
Yeah.
a price to doing that. And there's a lot of investment in these areas, and they will over time find ways to eliminate cost. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with all the energy transition stuff. We're big in all of it, because I think it does need business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the idea that we shouldn't have low cost energy, but it's the but of, oh, but it's damaging the planet. Well, what if it wasn't? Well,
Right.
yeah, we still don't want it. That's
Right.
like,
Our energy policy. Yeah, exactly. Our energy policy's been quote unquote all of the above, except for the ones that we don't like, which
and
are
the
not
ones
based.
that have given us this society. I mean, America fundamentally doesn't work without oil and gas right now. Is that it was designed? I mean, you can go to Europe and they've done great things with being just being efficient with energy, and they've done a lot of good things there. But they also live around and places you can walk to live. They have
Right.
in cyclable areas, but the
Yeah.
States has just been this huge, transportation is at the core of what's needed to survive, and,
Right.
and the love of Amazon and all these things. There's so much that comes from that. And I was just in the UK maybe a month or two ago, and they had they've because of Brexit, they kind of went to regular employees as opposed to European people coming out of harder zones coming in and driving their trucks.
Right.
And so when the regular employees get in trucks to drive stuff around, they're like, I'm not going to take these wages, and they go on strike.
Right.
And now you're limited to a certain percentage of gas tank. And people didn't know what to do. They couldn't go places that they otherwise would have gone. And I had friends going to travel up, but I don't know if I can travel up because the amount I'm allowed in a gas tank won't get me there. And they're in long lines. And there was and so that experience that happened in the 70s in the States,
Right.
there's a lot of people don't know that experience.
I remember it.
Right.
It was like the family would have to plan on how can we do this without driving. We had to.
Do you know
we
why
couldn't drive places.
Why did it happen?
Why did it happen? Well,
Yeah.
so this is actually one of the things I want to talk about, what happened in the 20th century compared to what's happening now, that we put all of our eggs in we weren't energy independent, I guess.
We trusted other people who,
Yeah.
Some of those countries, not great in how they run their countries, but we said, we'll trust them.
Yeah.
And they said, good, we have power now.
Right.
We're going to wield that power. And people don't understand that even when I first, early days of teaching people in the States about oil and gas, I explained how little the US had,
right,
and how dependent they were on other countries. And it's an interest. People were always shocked. They always thought we had it and we were,
right,
we were producing it. And it's just a lack of education that, bad people will do bad things when they have power over you. And that's
which we gave them.
Right.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, that's why everyone thinks Europe's just a bunch of great people who care about the environment, which they are, but they also, unsaid, are dependent on Russian gas.
Right.
Like, that's a big deal. They don't like it. When Poland almost found shale, the political pressure from Russia to make sure nobody was helping Poland find shale.
Yeah.
Never talked about. I mean,
yeah,
controversial, but it was really important that someone else didn't become a supplier to Europe for gas.
Mm-hmm.
And the country of Poland is all shale. I mean, they've got a tiny pocket that isn't shale. So to me, it was very confusing and odd. And, maybe technically it wasn't drillable, but something in me goes, I don't know.
Yeah.
These world power things with energy independence is one of the most important things you can do, is not rely on other countries who you do not agree with.
So this is the key of this conversation I want to have. So in America, we have the shale revolution. We've found all of this oil and gas resources, and we're actually a net exporter, which is incredible given the last few decades.
Amazing that happened.
And then we cancel the Keystone pipeline, or we can't, like, in my mind,
that's the Keystone is such an emotional, weird thing, because what the alternative is trucking it.
It's making it less efficient and more damaging for the environment. So if you're,
there are already pipelines coming through everywhere. I mean, it's just such a weird, what are you thinking you're doing? It's an emotional insane. People management system, of, okay, let's just tell them if this pipeline doesn't exist, bad oil stops, and that's
the polar bears will be better off. So we're, at the same time, we're using oil and gas all the time. We're also making it a lot less efficient and more environmentally damaged to use the oil and gas that we're using. And we're asking Russia and Saudi Arabia to make more oil and gas so we can send Russia and Saudi Arabia more money.
Yeah, the big
players. This is what's happening in
Iran's in the mix now, so they're a supplier, and that's kind of balanced out. But the people with it,
Right. So at the core of, I think, what happened in the 20th century, the humanity's standard of living went up because we got energy. We also had the largest transfer of wealth in human history from the West, mostly to the Middle East, also to Russia and Venezuela and Nigeria. And so that created, like, as you said, you gave these people power over us because we were dependent on them.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing about our business is we get to go see those countries as they stand and watch what they do. It's different when it's something on TV,
right?
And you think, oh, I'm sure that's good for everyone in those countries. It's not.
Yeah. Well, and we've had Americans, soldiers, getting combat pay since August of 1990. Clearly
That whole
Yeah,
thing is so misunderstood. I mean, Middle East politics it's not what I will say. It's not well reported here.
right.
Which
But it's
for whatever
only
reasons,
that's happened because of the oil and gas thing, right? So
yeah, yeah,
what I want to do is say, all right, the 20th century, we should have learned our lessons that we send all this money to a place that has a culture and everything that's not really maybe they're not on our best side all the time. We have good friends there, they're great people there, but not all the time.
yeah.
And now in the energy transition universe, we're doing wind and solar. That's a big thing, which,
Mhm.
by the way, it's very cool that we have this offshore technology. So on the one hand, you can get oil and gas. On the other hand, you can make wind. That's
Sure.
a really cool thing.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about a different transfer of wealth that's going to be happening in the 21st century. It's not going to the Middle East, right? It's going to China.
Yeah.
And can you talk, and this is super important, run us through how important China is for solar power, how important China is for wind, how important
Well,
China is for batteries.
it's been the approach as well. Other than they contain the most the rare earth metals, they have them. They have most control of that material. Also, the pressure. So what's happened is the world has said, "Man, I love this." We found some. So it's governments driving. So as governments go, "Hey, solar's good and offshore wind," because we've tried alternative ideas with the powers that be, and they no, solar works and wind works. Let's get the cost out of that. Let's just keep pushing money towards it to get the cost out. Well, that leads to countries that are low cost that then mean all your production. So now they have the materials, but then they also have this low cost way of producing, which I wouldn't say it's that they have low cost labor. I think it's just a way of producing low cost that the way they run the country. And so it shifts everything to them. And what they've done, which is interesting, the other thing that most of the world doesn't know, there was a bit of finger pointing in the world on corrupt practices, and everyone came, okay, well, let's create some laws. And the countries where the corruption was, they were saying, well, we think it's you, the Americans. So we're gonna tie this whole thing down, and so the countries that are decent created rules and laws and said, okay, that's it. We'll have no corruption. That will stop now. Great, good for us. Well, what that did then was the Chinese had a brilliant open door for anywhere they wanted to go to then take their wealth that they were generating and start building a network. So they've actually had a global reach that, particularly Africa.
Yeah.
Shocking how well they've moved into Africa, and they've moved in a lot of countries around the world. But things where they're not, they're not too worried about those issues. And so that's the nicest way to say it. But what that does is that means you're feeding into a system that really isn't about the betterment of humanity. It's more about a culture that believes they should run the world.
Yeah.
And they used to, they just think this little blip over the last few hundred years, that they're coming back, and they have a very strong national desire. I mean, Hong Kong in itself is just fascinating, because I worked across from Hong Kong for a while building a platform. And we go into Hong Kong to go across the water there. And they were trying to replicate Hong Kong, but when of course that changed and they had control, so you get people who've been allowed freedom and independence and the ability to grow yourself. It's such a hard transition.
Yeah.
I think without seeing these places, it's really hard for people to understand what it means and what happens to people in certain countries. And it's just, I mean, we could go for hours, take a country at a time and just talk through it. But this is a great setup here, and the world has all sorts of corruptions and things that go wrong in it. But when you come back to America and people are complaining, I'm like, oh my goodness, you just don't understand, what's happening in the rest of the world and what happens with power when it corrupts. And so I think it's the same with energy. Energy is such a critical. If everyone could understand world politics, it'd be great. They're not going to. It's similar with the technical challenges. And so the question is, how do you help people at least to make some reasonable assessments of the situation and go, we can actually find ways to use hydrocarbons and not affect the environment. We can do that.
Right.
We can find a way to have nuclear waste be nothing. We can technically solve that. There's ways right now to find coal and how to, have it neutralize some of the carbon that it's releasing and make it a lot friendly. There's things happening, there's technology
Right.
on the way. Those are really good things to do. But ramping up something that just plays to China's strengths is, I think, and that's your point, is really quite a difficult thing. I believe that the U.S. government's trying to build more local content, which the whole world does, by the way, except for the U.S., where they insist that you're giving something back to the country you're in.
Yeah.
And so they're starting to say, I think there's a program on solar where like we need to be doing more sourcing, more US manufacture, and that helps.
So let's break that down. Solar, and I have some friends in the solar industry. In the 2000s, we made a conscious decision that we would let China take that over. And according to them, that are in the world's biggest solar panel manufacturing, China has 100% of solar production, and there's zero chance that America can ever get that back. Like they say that we have outsourced solar panels to China completely, and it's not coming back. And the US government just made this announcement that they want 50% solar. To my point, that's going to be the largest transfer of wealth in human history from America to China. Like
they're trying to build it here, but there is the materials problem and there's the cost problem. So that I've talked to the DOE a few times on just, the idea of building, like we're going to do offshore wind. Okay. Let's do that in the States. Wow. It's been a while since we've had that kind of.
It's been a decade. Yeah.
And Korea does that, and that's good. And the next one who's killing Korea is China, because they've found ways. And so that you end up back at the same kind of circular thing of, okay, well, what can you do to build? Because some of these are not practical statements like we're going to do this.
Right.
Where you end up funding it. I saw it in the UK quite a bit where they were trying to build up capabilities. And there's some things you can do well, and there's some things you should just go, that's okay. If you look at, we build it in Norway, and when Norway builds, they focus on tech and they focus on invention, and they become the owners of a lot of invention. But generally we build in Poland, which is just across the water, by the way.
Right.
It's
right.
They're okay with, here's a friendly, low cost source.
Right.
There's ways to do that kind of thing. But I do think in the material side, solar's really tough, and the squeezing of cost rather than innovation.
Right.
If you're going to put money in things, be inventing, be finding something, that is plausible. So I like that. We're starting to see more public-private partnership. You need that. You need businesses in the mix to go, that's a terrible idea. There's tons of research money goes into things that are for professional researchers.
Right.
Not actually business capable even,
Right. Well, so the point there is that as we move into solar, which is great, I wish I need some solar panels on my house. That money is going to China. It's not going to the Middle East, which caused its own problems in the 20th century.
Right.
China is much better organized and a infinitely greater threat than the Middle East ever was.
Yeah.
So that's where we're sending our money. And not let's talk about solar and wind too. They make a lot of our wind equipment. There was an American.
We originally were in the tower business in California, and we got out of it pretty quick just because of that, because low cost steel coming out of China.
Yeah. There's a story of an American company that was building the control systems, and they wanted to manufacture it in China. And after they sent it there, within a year, their control systems were being manufactured. They stole it, right? They stole it.
There is, I know they're trying to fix that in China, but I mean, we've known that forever.
Yeah.
We've had things they couldn't make that we allowed them sold very well to China, made in California, weirdly. And we're shipping, almost everything there. But eventually they learn how to do stuff. And so they're very focused on that. And they're not companies. People get confused thinking China is like, I'm dealing with you're not, you're dealing with.
It's not General Motors. You're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party.
That's right. They try to, it's weird. My first visit, I was so fascinated with how their version of communism works, because I asked lots of questions, and they're cool because they thought they invented it all anyway. So they talk quite openly about this commu capital thing that they do, which is very, very interesting. But I mean, just foundationally human rights, if you care about the world, like I don't know. I think I've seen enough there. That's all I'm going to say. Because
This
enough there to be
Chinese
concerned.
tennis player has been disappeared, right? Well, a good friend of mine, her name is Cheng Lei, and I talk about her a lot, was an Australian journalist, Chinese ethnic, and she was arrested last year, thrown in jail as a spy. She's not a spy, she's an Australian journalist, but China and Australia are having this spat.
Mm.
Her kids are stuck in it's like this life ruined forever. I had some guys that started an amazing coding business on my podcast a few months ago, Arbet Kuzai. Anyway, he's a Uyghur and had to escape, and he was telling me about, you talk about low cost, a lot of that low cost is because the Uyghurs, and they take people and do that. But the technical thing, let's talk about this. So you have solar power or you have wind, but the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So you have to have batteries.
Right.
So where are batteries made? You talked about rare earths earlier. I think this is another huge problem. Like you need the backup.
That's some of the African interest for China as well, is that there, if there is a place, there's materials, they're going after it. They've
bought Africa over the last 20 years. They've bought a lot of Africa.
It's hard for people to understand that without going and seeing. But yeah, they've been funding a lot. They've been working out who they can work with, and the problem is to say everyone let's behave well as a planet is a good idea, and unfortunately, it's been an idea for the wealthy.
Right. It's very easy if you're wealthy to say, "Oh, I'm gonna,"
If you don't live around corruption and you don't live around police control or any of that stuff, you don't even think about it. You just think everyone's good because everyone's good. We've learned everyone's good. We should never feel bad about anyone. But it's like, gosh, I have to watch what I say because it's public. But
that's okay.
It's just there's so much that you see that you can't even fathom about countries around the world.
Yeah,
and how they discipline people is the best way to describe it. How they manage their countries, and then how they manage their wealth and where it goes. So it's just a misunderstanding, because if we can get half of the world to agree, what is happening is we're choosing expensive power, and we're funding other countries to help us do that. It's going to change the world, and so it's going to be, and because not only has the world got better with energy, and wars have reduced significantly, so many things have reduced, and I think most of these countries realize that we don't need to be aggressive in ways that are war based. We can do it on the digital front, we can do it on other fronts, we can work with other countries, we can do it with wealth. And that's what they've seen is, what they, if they want their agenda to happen, then they can find ways to do it. And amazingly, we're buying in. So they kind of like the way we're going, it kind of fits.
Oh yeah.
You look at the challenge Germany's had with trying to move to, renewable energy too fast.
Yeah.
So, the cost for the consumer has gone way up, and now and then when they have the peaks and troughs, they end up shipping coal in, and whatever else happens.
Russian gas,
but whatever they're doing, it's causing more carbon footprint than what they're saving. And so, they're moving over to hydrogen, which maybe that's a solution. But so I don't criticize the desire to pursue new energy. I think that's really good. But I do, it is sad that people don't understand the world and don't understand the technology side. So I think if we can help people along that journey of, I'm not taking a political side here on either. I'm just saying there is a world to understand and there are technologies to learn.
Well, the technical side. So when you have solar and wind, like I was saying, you have to have batteries, and these are massive amounts of batteries. There's a significant environmental cost with all that goes into a battery. You need cobalt and lithium, which is mostly owned by China. A lot of these batteries are bought from China. And
there's also a supply problem if the world goes to electric cars. We're just on batteries. Even if China does it, we don't have enough. So
there's not enough, right?
There's other issues. But there's technology solutions have to happen in this area that are viable, right?
Yeah. But so we have infinite natural gas because of the Shell Revolution, and we have carbon capture. Yeah. So in theory, rather than buying batteries from China and creating that environmental mess, you could use American natural gas
I think it's,
with carbon capture.
I think when people start dealing with energy poverty, even to a taste for a day, if you've been in a hurricane zone, you've lived this, right? Where the supply chain stop,
Yeah.
if you don't have gas in your car, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that those kind of shocks are coming.
Yeah.
High prices are coming, of course. I
Right.
think we've had 7 years without development, so
Right.
it takes 7 to 10 years to develop any oil
The new
capacity.
technology. Well, so talk about carbon. That's where I wanted to go with that battery
Carbon
point I was
capture.
making. Carbon capture.
It's a good solution. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions, once again, technically, that I'm not going to get into around carbon capture and whether that actually solves anything. But let's just say CO2 is a problem, and we can capture it, we can store it, but we're learning how to also reuse it, which is pretty interesting too. I think I like the business aspect of reuse, but I do carbon capture use is fascinating. It's young. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not where everyone's like, well, you could use it. Carbon dioxide, you can use it in your sodas. It's going to be the cheapest material out there. But
we don't
there's
drink that much Coke.
yeah. But I mean, there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of materials. There's a whole direction you go down on the use side, but there's work to do there. Storage is easy. It's been done. We understand it. And there's immediate technology we could use that is not it's not new. We can apply it immediately.
Right.
So that's getting interesting. I think storage is an easy solution. People will be taxed for somehow. However,
there's a cost to it.
There's a cost.
Right.
It takes our low cost energy and kind of moves it up.
Right.
But I think that's a good solution, and I think there are going to be more and more solutions in this space as people focus technically and have a business aspect around it. I think both those things.
Right. So carbon capture, between the time you capture it and you store it and so on, it's not 100. You don't get 100% of the carbon. There's still some carbon release, but it's much better. But there's other gases too, right? Like methane. There's other pollution that happens when you burn natural gas or coal.
There's nothing. Yeah. There's plenty of other things we could be doing. Fundamentally, that's been my position, even inside of oil and gas, where everyone's like, well, these people are crazy. You're like, well, okay, close the car of your garage and run your car. I mean, we know there's bad things coming out of this. I mean,
right.
It doesn't take a scientist to do that.
Actually, don't do that, please. If you're watching,
please, no one
we were joking.
Yeah, that is a suicide thing. But I mean, that concept of, we know there's bad things coming out of here that are not good for humans, so that can't be good for everybody.
Right.
So that managing that is highly feasible.
Right.
Filtering and reuse, storage, all of those things are very easy to do with the right will, and they're the right thing to do. Is to, okay, let's find out what's going into our environment and manage it. So.
Right. But the other alternatives, or like solar and wind, require batteries, and there's significant environmental problems and geopolitical problems, and there's other. In other words, there's no free lunch, right?
None of them, and none of the energy sources, have something free. The closest that I like are geothermal and nuclear.
Yes.
There's a bunch of work on geothermal looking at, because one thing, when you go into shales, they're hot. They're really hot. And so that is around everyone. There's tons of shale in the world. But that ability to plug into hot earth, it's not normal geothermal where you're going into, near the lava sources,
right,
we're getting into extreme heat, but there is heat and there is power that can be generated from that. So there's a lot of work going into how can you economically do that.
So I wanted to say, this is the best for last. Like this is perfect segue. There's I didn't know anything about geothermal until a few months ago. There's basically shallow, and I think a lot of Scandinavian countries just tap into,
Scandinavia, Germany, they've been using earth heat for buildings for a while now. Since
my parents
I was taught it. I was taught it as a kid. So
it's easier to cool in the summer and it's easier to heat in the winter. You just get 20-degree water, or 15-degree, or 60 or 70-degree Fahrenheit.
Pump of fluid, heat it up. Yeah.
So you can do basic heating and cooling, which is great. It's there. Why not use it? It doesn't create a mess or anything like that. but the deep geothermal is really interesting. So how does that work? And I know NOV's got a little bit going on there, but
We do. We have technology in the space. What's nice is an oil and gas downturn allows us to kind of
yeah,
focus. And in that
it's
space,
drilling. Yeah.
what they've done is it's one of the most underfunded renewable sources is geothermal. And probably because, okay, it's the ring of fire. It's Iceland,
Japan, right.
yeah, there's places that you can go where, you also may have earthquakes.
Right.
But it's what to do with being next to tectonic plates, so that was how everyone thought. But this concept that the earth has heat, I mean, for us, the shale is the best place to be thinking of it, as you're dealing with 300-degree temperatures, which for us means our tools needed to be developed. And
right.
So we focused our energies onto basic geothermal and said, okay, listen, and just because it was underfunded, these are the cheapest rigs in the world. Like, this technology we have, they don't have in geothermal. It's very, very fundamental rigs. And so we've kind of turned up and said, well, hey, what if you invested some money in the technology and you could make it cheaper? And that's kind of what we've been doing lately. We're very big in the fiberglass space and non-metallics. And so we've been using liners, and we've worked on the drill bits to get them to last longer. And we're working on sensors to work at high temperatures. And so there's things we can do that historically they went, oh, we can't afford that stuff. Well, what if it halves the cost?
Right.
Oh, yeah, maybe we could afford that stuff,
Right.
We're using robots on the test rig we have. We're just industrial robots like you see in car manufacturing. And well, they have very hot pipe that comes out, that's a really good application for them,
So if you drill a hole and there's hot earth down there, how do you turn that hot earth? How far is it? 5,000, 10,000 feet down?
It varies. They're more in the tens.
Okay, so a couple miles down. Miles or kilometers down. How do you turn that into electricity?
But there's various forms, but you can basically the simplest way of looking at it is pumping water and dealing with heat and turning that into turbines, converting it at the surface. But there's a lot of playing in that science as to how do you efficiently turn that into electricity? So that's one of the games, but a lot of it is just heat and steam generation.
Well, that's what a coal plant or natural gas, they make heat,
right?
That makes steam, and that spins a turbine. Right. And if you spin a magnet, it makes electricity.
Right. Basically, yeah. You're converting it that way. But it's a really interesting science because we just not played with it. It's right. Not had the interest, but the idea, certainly what happened in shale, so different to any other drilling, is shale is drilling intensive because there's no flow of hydrocarbon inside the rock, and so you have to break it, but you only break it so far. Then you go drill next to it and you break the next part and break the next. It's very intensive, but produces a lot of oil and gas quickly. Those are hot. Same kind of concept is available where what if we could, because what we did with that was we shrunk the time. So if you go to the Middle East and try and drill a well, it's like 60-day, 140 day. We were down to 4 days.
Days US. Equals dollars, right? That's a big deal.
Days equals dollars, and the technology as well, and the things that we did really quickly. Fascinating how we got that, and that was through investment in technology, and we just kept focusing on the supply chain. And this is a unique US thing, because I know getting cost out of process is really good in the US, and people don't realize that. They think, well, the Japanese were really good at that, but we're not.
Or the Chinese, right?
Yeah, well, the Chinese aren't process, they're cost, they're less process than they don't.
They're cheap labor.
Well, we manufacture in China. We manufacture all over the world, so we have a deep understanding of all these cultures and how you do things. But in California, next to Disneyland, we got our costs competitive with Poland and China in manufacturing.
Wow!
And that was process. That was thinking of people who obviously liked living in California and wanted to stay there.
Right.
And so we were probably the last oil field plant there. And we also trained our supply chain. So our supply chain was all over the States, and it ended up being in Southern California because we taught them how to do that as part of the process. You have no purchase orders. You manage your supply, you manage your touching of materials.
Right.
A very smart process, but fantastic. And it made me believe like there's so much we can do. to get things better in the States by just using that drive. But what this may be controversial. Let's have some water. What may be controversial in that space is that we didn't have unions. And this is one of the things I talk with the DOE about. If you, as much as I understand, people think companies are bad and protect the workers. I agree with that. But if you have a company culture that is pro-worker, which is why I love the company I joined,
right.
You're paying them high. The unions have no chance.
Right.
They can't come in and say, "Oh, look at how bad they're treating you. They're treating you great."
Right.
And if you treat people great, and then you focus on cost, that was amazing what we got done. And I believe that about the States, that there is because that's back to my original where I started, the psychology of the two, US and UK, and why would there be companies designing and building large buildings on the Thames,
Right.
And it made no sense to me until I realized, oh, it's the culture of the place.
Right.
It's the spirit of the people and the focus. And if you get away from this, I think media-driven polarization of people,
Right.
You can do amazing things in this country. And I've loved watching it, where you're able to produce great results and low cost. It doesn't mean cheap,
Right.
and you can efficiently do a lot of things. So that's what happened in shale. I think it's unmatched. We do shale in Argentina, heavy labor unions. We've done it all over the world, but no one can get the results like they get here. And that was a focus of people,
Right.
and companies and technology and investment.
Right.
And I think that's the secret to this whole thing, is like,
Right.
let companies get in. And that's kind of been our approach. Let companies get into energy transition issues, and not have governments solve it so much. Because you and DOE, we're talking to them, and I'm like, we don't really want your money. And they were like, you're the first person who said that to us. And I said, well, that's because that's why people come to you, is for money to extend their career or help
Right.
with research
Right.
but we're a company. Like, if we have a great idea, we don't
Right.
want you owning part of it.
Right.
We will fund our great ideas. Don't worry. We don't want
Right.
your money. So that feeling of like, we're going to solve problems, and we can do that as a company and as a group of people. And we're an international company. We bring that culture everywhere, which means we can do great things. But it's I think it's true of, I'm a great believer in the ability of people who are cared for and focused and driven. I think we can do a lot of things. So I really get excited about what's possible in the energy space. I do think we can clean up oil and gas, and I think that the natural consequence of people trying to get rid of it in their life, and unless you want to just have a farm and physically run a plow with animals.
I mean, the 1600s were great, as long as you were the king or a noble person, but other than that, it was pretty awful.
and really, the sad thing is, America has been the king,
Right.
and what's happened is others are rising up.
Yeah.
And it's time to just go back to that work ethic of the country, and invention and innovation, and the things that happen here that people struggle to copy.
Yeah.
Because I think that's kind of the fun part, is that there's a lot we can do, and I really have enjoyed it. I was not planning on being in energy particularly, but when you get into it and you see what it does, I mean, I kind of started that earlier and didn't finish it, was you go to countries and you watch them develop because they get access to low cost energy. I mean, it's fantastic to watch, to watch humanity evolve.
When the pandemic happened, there was a colleague of mine from Harvard Business School. She's African. She's West African, from Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, that region.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the PPE, and I said, well, why are you buying PPE from China? West Africa must have low costs. Just make it there. And she said, Terry, we don't have electricity.
Yeah.
Like, imagine not being able to have a business because there's no electricity.
When they do, it's not consistent. So imagine,
it's intermittent. Yeah.
Many people won't have this experience, but I'm sure I have. You're in an elevator and it stops. That is normal.
Right.
In these countries.
Yeah.
Because it's been run by electricity.
Right.
So, I've gone to countries. I won't say which, but I was in one country, and they called and said, okay, you're coming. will you be presenting? I said, well, yeah, I'll have a PowerPoint. Oh, okay, well, we need to delay a couple of hours. And when I pull up and they have a generator outside, and I don't get it at first. They're pointing at the generator and there's line running into the building. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks for pointing at the generator. So we go up. It's because I'm going to run a projector.
Right.
And they don't want the presentation to stop.
Right.
And that's just a normal experience for them.
Yeah.
And you know, that's crazy, you know.
Yeah.
And for them, you know, you get used to carrying sheets when you're doing that, because they don't have coverings for the windows because they work in the daytime.
Right.
So there's no reason to cover the windows.
Right.
So you actually have to nail these sheets up to be able to present, and then they'll work on constant electricity. And if you've never experienced it, you think that's the world. If you've gone to Europe and here, that's the world.
Right. And it's
not,
very,
not that way, you know.
yeah, it's a lot of our energy, you know, self-righteousness is very conceited and,
Yeah.
oh, we need to do this and that. Well, what that really means is that several 100 million people are going to be in extreme poverty instead of regular poverty when they lose out on that energy. So we really need to figure out how to make,
It's shocking.
how to make clean energy.
It's worth seeing the world to understand that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people still need low cost, abundant energy, and
Yeah.
we've got a ways to go with the rest of the planet, but cleaning it up on the way, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, we have to do that. So one final technology, you mentioned micronuclear, and I just want to briefly touch on fusion, because fusion is my favorite thing, but
Yeah.
we've been 20 years away from fusion for the last 50 years. So what do you think about, so micronuclear and fusion, the final technologies?
Micro, I think, is available as far as I understand it. There's a lot of the questionable parts are just, you know, for me, it's pure politics at this point, that people,
Right.
no one wants to touch that word.
That's fission, right? That's when
Mhm.
the radioactive material splits atoms, that makes heat. And
Right.
like we talked about with heat, you can make electricity.
Right. And it's just such an abundant source. I mean, it's a constant, you know, production of energy.
Yeah.
I don't know, in fusion, I don't know.
That's not a NOV
Oh,
technology.
I mean, we've been in and out of nuclear just because we acquired a company,
Right.
and we didn't stay in it long.
Yeah.
It's been struggling as a business.
As a business, yeah.
So it's always the business aspect of, is there something there we could do?
Right.
I just personally, I'm kind of like you. I personally like, it's a really interesting journey.
Right.
And one thing I've learned is that business kind of drive and focus on technology is what we need in these areas. Those are just such high risk games. I know if we talk
Right.
about, I have R&D people who kind of, hey, maybe we could use nuclear, and you're like, that's a journey. That's a
Right.
journey. I don't know. You know, if we start looking at it, it's just a whole other protection system that has to go. But I'm just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And the misinformation around it, really.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate aspect of it. Well, there's a lot that has to happen. The world needs energy. We need more energy to get more people out of poverty, and you know, it needs to be clean to help the climate. And there was an organization. My first podcast was with a guy named Larry Copald, who runs the Carbon Underground. They're actually trying to take carbon through land use, and plants and microorganisms, you know, bring carbon back down into the ground. Like he says, where it came from.
Right.
You know, it used to be plants, it went underground, and now we're putting it up again. But there's a lot of, my point is, there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. There's not just one thing. And hopefully,
I think the hard part is all of the good ideas. It's, you need abundant, you need low cost. You know?
right.
That's the game. And
The driving philosophy. Well,
and
and
transportable. I mean, ultimately,
right.
you know, we could all lean on geothermal if there was a way, if batteries were a really good idea,
right.
or another method of moving energy. So there's tons of great ideas that just don't play out.
Right.
They just don't. And so people get funds, and it distracts everyone, and you can watch YouTube videos forever on things that will never play out. So we need business based, you know, how can we grow and distribute energy so that people can have it, you know,
economically.
Those are the
right.
hard questions that people try to avoid because
it doesn't feel good. Well, you need rational thought, not emotion, to make the right decisions. And that's what hopefully this helped. hopefully folks can have heard a few perspectives they hadn't heard before. The energy world is changing, but I think, there's lots of companies like NOV that are their energy, they're moving into new forms. I think companies that don't do that might end up like Blockbuster or Kodak, or
Yeah, you may have to. Yeah, I
yeah,
think the transition's coming. It's it's the whole stopping one thing to have another that we don't have ready yet.
right,
I think it's allowing that process to go on, and it'll grow. I think everyone's used to software and microchip, growth
right.
curves, so they just think, oh, it's that easy. It just happens all the time. Moore's law is law. Like everything works that way now.
Yeah, the chips work that way, but energy is a different story. But
Yeah.
well, anyway, well, David, thank you so much for coming on. I know this is a lot of time out of your busy day, and I appreciate it. And again, if you like the podcast, please subscribe Down to Earth at Terry Virts, or at Astro Terry on social media.